Hello and welcome to another episode of Taylor Talks Comics. Today we're going to go over the ROM Omnibus, the original Marvel Years, Volume 1. Please stay tuned. And this one is the one that's featuring Wolverine and the X-Men on the cover because they do appear in a story in here. Show off the spine here. All of the spines have a different image here at the bottom. Underneath the dust jacket, you'll see what the standard edition cover looks like on the bottom because the spine on the book is the same for all of them. Underneath the dust jacket. So you get ROM, the original Marvel Years, Volume 1 down here, and then the Marvel Omnibus. There will be a total of 3 volumes that complete this whole set. And they are all going to be released in the next, within the next 9 months or so. Because I think the 3rd volume comes out late this year, early next year. On the back, you have all the covers of the issues inside, with ROM, the Space Knight right there. Tells you what issues it is including, which is ROM 1 through 29, and Power Man and Iron Fist, number 73. And written by Bill Mantlo, Stephen Grant, Joe Duffy, illustrated by Sal Buscema and Greg LaRocque. With a little blurb here from Screen Rant, one of Marvel's most unlikely success stories of the early 80s. So let's take off the dust jacket here. And underneath we will see one of, I think this is the standard edition cover, which matches the actual, the first issue. This is the facsimile edition that Marvel put out a few months ago. But this is what the first issue cover looked like. So that's the cover they chose for the standard edition. And then the spine, like I said, that's what I believe the standard edition image looks like on the dust jacket down there. And then the back is this, which is another standard edition cover. I want to say this is Steve Ditko. I think it's a Steve Ditko piece. So far with the front and back and this, there's only one cover missing that you haven't seen, which I think is right here. It's this George Perez piece. Yeah, it's this piece right here, but it's in color. But it's a George Perez fan art piece or commission that he did that they've repurposed for a cover for this. So that's the other DM cover. So 4 covers for these, kind of crazy. But this is an unlikely story that this isn't even an omnibus. Marvel's been pumping these facsimile editions out for issues number 1 of Micronauts and ROM. I think they also did a ROM and the X-Men, kind of a square-bound trade paperback kind of type deal where it collects the entire crossover of the X-Men in it. But this was the omnibus that we never thought we'd ever get. ROM and Micronauts both, because they were tied into licensing. I want to open up the book here and show you the insides a little bit. There's the title page. Here's the credits. So you get really good credits with which issues all of these people worked on. Oh, Frank Miller is that cover. That's a Frank Miller cover right there. Sorry, on that one. Not Steve Ditko. Here is the table of contents showing you each issue, what month they came out, the 2 different stories included, if there's 2 stories or 1. And they're all in order here. So you get issues 1 through 22, and you get the Power Man Iron Fist 73, and then issues 23 through 29. You get a great intro by Chris Ryall, who is a ROM, the Space Knight expert, and will tell you everything you need to know about why this was an unlikely book to ever come out and why he always wanted to see it come out. And then we're going to dive into the story. So why this was an unlikely book to ever come out was because it is tied under a bunch of rights issues. ROM, the Space Knight, is owned by Hasbro, who also owned such licenses that Marvel did comics for as G.I. Joe, Transformers, Micronauts, but that wasn't the only thing, because IDW had the rights to do ROM comics for a while, but they couldn't reprint the Marvel era because the Marvel era included a lot of things that Marvel owned within the story, including a lot of the crossover characters, because not only does Power Man and Iron Fist crossover, but also the X-Men crossover, and then some other characters. S.H.I.E.L.D. makes an appearance throughout here too. There's a S.H.I.E.L.D. character right there. And then they also own the rights to some of the the lore that Bill Mantlo created for the character. Because that's the thing, is that ROM the Space Knight was a failed toy. In the 80s, there was this robotic toy called ROM the Space Knight. Maybe I'll throw an image on the screen so you can take a look at it. And that's all it was. There was no other toys involved in the toy line. There was no villains, bad guys, no extra different ROM figures or ROM accessories or anything like that. It was just this one robot toy that Hasbro got the rights to, and then they wanted to adapt to comics. So Bill Mantlo, with the help of Buscema, doing character designs and whatnot, had to, like, from whole cloth, create the entire lore and backstory and existence of this character, which is a lot different than, like, Transformers and G.I. Joe. There's the Marvel Masterwork pinup. Because, like, Larry Hama did a lot for G.I. Joe's lore in the comics, and he did a lot of the help with the file cards for the toys and whatnot. But between the toys and the cartoon and the comics, they all kind of worked hand in hand of creating the backstory and lore of those characters. But ROM had no help in that regard. It was all Bill Mantlo and Sal Buscema. But again, with all the tie-ins to Marvel and everything else, this was never going to be reprinted unless Marvel was in conjunction with it. And they were finally, and it came out. I will say, I don't like to give people FOMO too often, but we don't know when these will be reprinted, if they'll be reprinted. Marvel's had a habit of doing a solid, like, 1 year printing of, like Conan the Barbarian. When they had the license for that, they did, like, in a couple of years, they printed as much as material as they could. That's why we got all those Conan omnibuses all at once. Same for Master of Kung Fu, when they had the license to the Max Romer characters that feature in the early issues of Master of Kung Fu with Shang-Chi. Like, Fu Manchu was a character that Marvel does not own, so they had to license that out. But so we don't know how long they had the ROM license. We don't know how many times they'll be able to reprint this, if ever, after this. So if this is a series that even interests you a little bit, I will say, don't hesitate on this. You probably want to pick this up as quickly as you can, and so you don't miss out on this. This omnibus is great, though. It does include all of the letters pages, which is always a great encapsulation of, like, the time period that these stories came out, seeing what people's real reactions in real time were to these stories. And early in the letters pages of the omnibus, you'll read people writing in saying, like, oh, it's another toy license, like, I'm not really interested in this. But then slowly, as each issue progresses, people kind of get hooked on it, and that's why it was a successful series that lasted for, like, 75 issues. So, and that'll be what completes that third omnibus volume. With all that said, that's, like, the back history of why this omnibus got created. But ROM is this character. Let me go back to the beginning here. From a different planet, and he is fighting these dire wraiths. So you get in the back history here. So it really starts off great because you get a little bit of the back history of who he is and where he comes from. But when he pops down in the middle of this suburban town in, is it Virginia or West Virginia? I forget. But the suburban town of Virginia, which is a different location than you get with most Marvel stories. Most Marvel stories are in New York, right? So you get this nice small town suburbia. Think of, like, a Pleasantville or, like, you know, perfect suburbia. Perfect white picket fence kind of suburbia. Leave It to Beaver, that kind of thing. Excuse me. And it starts off kind of like a monster story because all these pedestrians and civilians are, like, freaking out because this giant robot just appears out of nowhere. And they think he's going to attack all of them. And then they see him literally vaporize this human being, and they're all freaking out like, oh, this is a monster. He's killing all his people. Little do they know that ROM knows exactly who he's going after, and it's not humans. It's the dire wraiths. And the dire wraiths have an ability to cloak themselves and change themselves to make them look like a human being. Kind of like the Skrulls, if you're familiar with those from Marvel. So what's happened now is we found out on Earth that for years and years and years, especially in this little town, this little suburban town, all of these dire wraiths have come in and cloaked themselves to look like really humans, living amongst all these other humans for eventual takeover. But the only person that knows that is ROM. So when he comes in here and he vaporizes these dire wraiths, people think it's like, hey, there's Uncle Joe from the barbershop, or I've known that guy for 20 years, and how could he vaporize him? He's a human. But really, it was a dire wraith. And the only person that believes him is... Sorry. Brandy is the name of the girl, and her love interest, Steve. So Brandy is the only one that believes Rom at first, because in the very first opening scenes, you see that Rom saves her from this car wreck. Right here, her car almost crashes into him, and he saves her and protects her. So she, hesitantly at first, but eventually she believes him and wants to help him out. Her boyfriend Steve, though, at first is like, you're crazy, my girlfriend's losing it, that guy's evil, I've seen him vaporize human beings. So Rom is trying to convince, and his girlfriend Brandy are both trying to convince Steve to believe them, that Rom is here to only kill the dire wraiths. And then eventually Steve is on board, but there's also this love triangle that happens throughout the backstory where Rom is starting to get reminiscent of his love interest from the planet Galador, where he comes from. And he's putting that upon Brandy, so he starts to kind of start to have feelings for Brandy. And Steve is involved, and it's like this love triangle. So it does have a lot of depth to it in that regard. Here's the Mad Thinker, if you're familiar with him from other Marvel comics. So again, these Marvel characters appear here as Fantastic Four. Huh? You know the Mad Thinker?
Yeah, hi, I'm Riley from Hey Kids Comics. I have been, a long time ago, I was reading the Fantastic Four because my dad's been forcing me to read.
Oh my goodness.
And,
there could be a lot worse things that you could be forced to do.
And I skipped this one because, I wanted to read a Skrull issue because I'm super interested in those. And I saw the Mad Thinker in a Fantastic Four issue. It's one of the first 10 or 20.
Yeah, it's in one of those first books you have. Here's the wedding of Steve and Brandy, but there is a twist involved, in someone within the story is not who they think they are, or who you think they are, or who everybody else thinks they are, which is kind of the fun twist in terms of it. Like, again, like a good Skrull story is, since the dire wraiths can clone themselves into looking like, I keep saying cloak themselves into looking like a human being, there'll be lots of times throughout the story that maybe a human you're seeing is not who they are after all, and it turns out to be a dire wraith the whole time. Here's the crossover with the X-Men, and if you're familiar with X-Men lore, you know that dire wraiths play a part in the X-Men because, again, the dire wraiths are owned by Marvel, so they can do whatever they want with them. They just can't do whatever they want with ROM. So dire wraiths have appeared in X-Men comics since then, not just within these ROM stories. We get a crossover with X-Men, and I'm trying to remember who else appears throughout here. Oh, here's the Iron Fist issue. So the Iron Fist issue, Power Man and Iron Fist number 73, that issue's never been reprinted by Marvel in any of the collections of Power Man and Iron Fist. Like, I have the Epic collections of those two, and they skip issue number 73. The reason for that is because ROM is in there. People have wondered if they ever reprint those Epic collections, or if they ever do print a Power Man and Iron Fist Omnibus, if this issue will be reprinted in there. And I have to say, it seems like no. It seems like the only time you'll ever get this issue in oversized format or in a Marvel trade paperback or hardcover will be in this omnibus itself. So if that's something you're wanting, keep that in mind. But that issue does cross over into ROM number 23, with Power Man and Iron Fist taking a role in there. I will say though, so who is this for fans of? People typically, there's Galactus. With these licensed comics, there'll be a nostalgic appeal for people that love the ROM toys or G.I. Joe toys or Transformer toys as kids. I have to say, if people are telling you they're big ROM fans as a kid, it's probably from the comic. Again, there was just that one toy, that one robot toy that no one really, if they owned it, they weren't really big ROM fans because there was nothing else to play with it. So if they're ROM fans, it's from this comic. So if there's a nostalgic piece that people have, it's with this comic. Again, this was kind of a rare thing for Marvel. We don't know if they'll ever reprint this. Is it worth trying out? If you're a fan of Bronze Age Marvel, I will say this is definitely worth trying out. It is very much Bronze Age Marvel, Bronze Age-y Marvel. Like, it's very heavy on the dialogue. Lots of panels from Sal Buscema, who's an incredible artist. I love his work within these stories. And Bill Mantlo could be very purple prosy, kind of Chris Claremontian-ish in his liking, so that's a little bit of forewarning. But I love, here's a great double page spread of Galactus. I absolutely loved it. I think it's such a fun sci-fi adventure story, kind of space opera-y at times, especially when you're talking about the planet Galador, the back history of ROM, and why he's the only space knight still around, because he wasn't the only space knight ever. You'll find that out as well. So if you're into Bronze Age Marvel, you want to try this out and see what it's like, definitely for you. One more note, though, too, about what it contains. It does contain the finishing of the Nova story that's not in the Nova Omnibus. So if you have the Nova Omnibus, it kind of ends abruptly because his story continues into the ROM comics. Again, if they ever reprint that Omnibus, probably won't have these ROM issues in it. But if you're wanting to conclusion to that, you might want this Omnibus to conclude Nova's story. Here's an example of what the toy looked like, though. Very blocky, not as dynamic looking as this great cover, this first issue cover here. Oh, that was the other cover too. Maybe I got it wrong here then. Maybe this was not a cover. The DM covers I think were this, the George Perez cover that I showed a minute ago, and the Sal Buscema cover right here, which is a pinup with panels in it, and then the issue number 1 cover was the standard edition. So correction on that. Does have some good back matter here. You get some pinups, some advertisements of the ROM comic, some penciled unused cover by Ed Hannigan, and then you get some penciled and inked pages by Sal Buscema, and then the George Perez. So yeah, let me know in the comments if you've tried this out, if you've read read these, if this is your first time reading them. Let me know if I've sold you on it, if you will be buying this at organicpricedbooks.com. Which again, my promo code, which is in the description below, Taylor Talks Comics, all one word, will save you $2 off of this book or any others. If you put an order in with OPB for 4 or more books, use TTC, ship it together, and they'll save you 5% off of that larger order. Let me know in the comments, though, if you've read this before, or if this is your first time reading it, what your thoughts are. Anything else. I love talking comics, and I reply to all comments. Give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.